All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Anti-Media. I'm your host, Jake Anderson, and our little Thursday installment here has been off the air for a couple weeks. I was traveling, went down to Los Angeles, which of course makes me sick, so I'm a little under the weather. Um, but the show must go on. And for some reason, when I get physically ill, I get just weird. I just get weird. So this could be a weird show, especially because we're going to be talking about some weird things. Now, originally, I was going to talk about aliens tonight. And I don't mean illegal aliens. I mean like actual extraterrestrial aliens. And that's something that my co-host DB and I would just really tear up. But given that the Kurdish referendum vote, we're fresh off of that, and of course that's a big issue, and it was thrown at me to do a show here to talk about the Kurdish independence movement, and I think we probably should. You know, I don't know very much about it, to be honest with you. I had to do some big time research today to get caught up to an even toddler's level. I mean, I know a little bit about it, but
did you
much.
Did you learn anything about the Yazidis?
No.
Okay, so the Yazidis are a very, very important subgroup within the Kurdish envelope, and we'll go into that because they worship an extremely important deity called the Peacock Angel. We can definitely go down that rabbit hole, but this is a great topic because the two people we're going to have on, Justin King and Danny Quest, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to be on, have some different opinions about things, but I think one thing they'll probably be able to do, and I'll chime in as well, is that we've got to make a distinction between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism is patriarchal supremacy, and it's not just a bunch of white men that are in charge. I mean, it's easy to say that, and we see a media narrative driving kind of that undertone, and it's very, very obvious. And we also see Europe is undergoing essentially what's a cultural invasion in many ways. So, you know, the conspiracy theories, you can call them all day about blah, blah, blah. There's Jews in charge of everything, and I know Quest will probably get on that bent. And in a lot of ways, he's right, because there's very, very powerful Jews, among them Soros. But that doesn't mean they're the only players.
There are most certainly powerful Jews out there.
Oh, yeah. But there's powerful Chinese guys, too. There's powerful Japanese guys.
There's powerful everyone.
Everyone. You know, the only country that's boot-stomped is Africa. So if we really want to be true about it, you have a guy like Mugabe, who's basically lived an entire life in power. And you know, that's the one place in the world where there's some legitimate complaints about the power structure being so homogenized. But for the rest of the world, it's everybody.
So this issue goes back. All the way to the Ottoman Empire.
What issue?
Well, the Kurdish nationalism.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
But the Yazidis are thousands of years old because the Peacock Angel, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. Kurdistan deserves to exist. There's other groups that deserve their own countries. There's probably 4 or 5 countries in our country right now that could probably make it on their own and deserve to exist. So.
Yeah, there's 4 countries, you know, at the heart of this. You know, you have Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, which all Kurds are kind of divided among them, and they all, you know, in recent days since the referendum, you've had pretty much all of the countries, you know, pretty much threatening military action.
They don't want to lose those oil fields. That's the whole. This is what all the jousting is with the whole The whole thing with Syria and Iraq is there's parts of the country where there's massive oil fields, and that's it. And where do you run pipelines to, and who controls them, and what country is Kurdistan going to be? Is it going to be a master of its own destiny, or a puppet for us, or a puppet for Turkey? Who knows? So that's what it all boils down to. It's economics. It's the center of the world's market, essentially, when you look at Turkey and you look at Syria. I mean, that's literally in the middle of China and Europe. So the two major economic hubs in the world. Most people like to think America is really, really, really powerful, but in all honesty, we are part of that kind of European sphere. So,
yeah, and it's a complex issue, but we're gonna try and break it down a little bit here. And so we're gonna be having two pretty cool dudes on to talk about this. One of them is Justin King from the Fifth Column. And Justin, are you joining us now? No? Okay. Well, I guess that's the end of that. No, just kidding. He'll be on there. So, yeah, Justin King is from the Fifth Column, and Danny Quest writes for The Truther. And I believe I'm joined now by Danny Quest. Danny, are you there?
Yeah, mic check. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I can't hear Justin King, though.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. All right.
There
great.
we go. All right.
So we got you guys both here. And so, yeah, the referendum took place. 93% of Kurds Kurds and non-Kurds voted for independence. But since then, you've had the Iraqi PM wanting to cancel the referendum, calling it illegitimate. You've had Turkey, Iraq, and Iran all considering joint military action against the Kurds. So we have historical issue that's now running up and hitting the buzzsaw of a modern-day geopolitical nightmare in that area, where the United States has been essentially neo-colonial, imperial, whatever you want to call it. We've laid our stake in that area. I guess I'll let you guys each make a statement here as to what you want to start with here to dig into this issue. Danny, I got a hold of you first, so why don't you start off? What do you think is significant about this vote? Do you think it will hold, and do you think it's legitimate or illegitimate?
I think any democratic vote or referendum is legitimate. I think it's part of it's the summer of independence. I convened this roundtable to discuss not only Kurdish but Catalina. There's other places in the world too that are pushing for independence or sovereignty post Brexit.
Right. We can talk about. I should have mentioned, like, we can delve into other independence movements as well.
I mean,
we're talking about Catalan, though, right?
Yeah, Catalan. Yeah, Catalans. Their vote's October 1st, which I also find very much interesting. I wanted to bring Justin King in, particularly for Kurdistan, because he has a much wider base of knowledge than I do on this issue. I've been doing a little bit of research today, and the most complicated part that I see of a Kurdish independence is its location. It's intertwined in a lot of different countries. So it's in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, I think a little bit in Jordan, and really carving it out, I think, is going to be the hardest part in finding a sovereign state for the Kurdish people. But moving forward, I think the vote will hold in the minds of the world, especially with the West support, primarily Israel, Poland. Some of the European countries are supporting an independent Kurdish state. So that helps their cause a lot. And I also see a lot of I see it establishing a semi-autonomous zone for the minority religions of the Middle East. So I think a lot of the Christians, the Yazidis, the Yanjuns, I can't remember. So there's a lot of minor or minority religions in that area, and I think they will feel safer in a Kurdistan autonomous zone. I think some of them already have. Like a lot of the Christians in Syria went to a region that was protected by the Kurds during the original ISIS part. So the longevity of Kurdistan will survive, and I think everyone, especially us as libertarians, we support an independent state. I fully support the autonomy of Kurdistan, and I'm interested to see Justin's perspective and where it takes us globally and what the implications are.
Yeah, Justin, why don't you follow up here? You have on your site, the fifth column, you have pretty extensive a number of articles, a couple of which were written by you on this issue. What are your thoughts on the referendum, and where we're at with this particular independence movement?
Well, the good news right off the bat. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. My headset seems to be acting up. But the good news right off the bat is that Iran backed down, kind of rolled out military action. This happened within, today. And because of that, Turkey backed down.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And right after the referendum, Assad was like, whoa. Okay, well, we'll talk to our Kurds. Maybe we'll give them autonomy within Kurdistan. They can have their own, or within Syria, they can have their own little country set up, but not change our borders. So Syria backed down almost immediately. Iran and Turkey did today. Iraq, their parliament authorized troops to go to Kirkuk. So it looks like Iraq is the only country that is going to go full bore on this. Which, I mean, that makes sense. It's their country getting split. But at the same time, they have to know that without outside support, they can't beat the Kurds. So I'm hopeful now that it actually won't turn into a shooting war, at least not a long one. I'd have to agree that an independent Kurdistan would become a kind of a home base for every oppressed ethnic group in the Middle East. Any group that is not getting a fair shake in their home country would travel there. And I think that Iran and Turkey kind of see it. Initially, they were worried about it sparking revolutionary tendencies among their own Kurdish populations. But I think they're starting to see the bigger picture in the sense that, if you have a Kurdistan that's 50 miles away, are you really going to go to war to try to just add a little bit of territory to it? Probably not. You'll probably move. And I think they're starting to see that as a possibility. And, Turkey just doesn't want to get involved because of the money involved. They would lose too much. Currently, Iraq has knocked out or shut down air traffic into Erbil, and so that's where we're at, like kind of a situation report. I've been a longtime advocate of Kurdish independence. I think that it's something that will, in a lot of ways, stabilize the Middle East because of the fact that the Kurds are the way they are. They are truly secular. They're Kurdish before they are Shia, before they are Sunni, before they are Christian, before they are Yazidi, whatever. They're Kurdish first. And the Middle East doesn't have a lot of that. Normally there's a lot of religious involvement and the religion comes first. This would be the first organic nation like that there. And I really think that it could kind of serve as an example because I think it would be economically very prosperous. And the oil fields definitely have a lot to do with that. And if it does go loud and they do start shooting, that's going to be why they start shooting. But We'll see.
What's to say that this isn't just going to become the next spot for seizing oil fields? I mean, this goes back a long time in this region of the world, with the U.S. getting involved, and I don't know to what extent the U.S. would get involved this time around. But is this a peace that can hold? I mean, what are some of the thoughts on 10 years down the road, whether this can actually come to pass and whether they can actually sustain peace in the area?
I think that if they can get it, and if they can get independence and they can get that oil flowing onto the market, I would say that within 2 or 3 years, if they can last that long, it'll hold forever. Because right now, the only thing they have going against them is that they don't really have an air force. And I guarantee you that as soon as that oil hits the market, they'll fix that. On the ground, militarily, nobody's going to touch them. Their military forces are, I mean, ISIS went around and kicked the crap out of everybody. They met the Kurds on the battlefield and the whole war changed. They have a different doctrine in the way they fight, and it doesn't in the Middle East. It stands up pretty well. So to me, it all depends on how quickly they can get that oil on the market. And once they're stabilized, I don't think anybody would want to touch them. Now, we do have the problem of U.S. companies, Chevron in particular, right now is doing exploratory drilling inside Kurdistan. So, and we know that Chevron owns a lot of, U.S. politicians. So that's the big worry. But we did get Chuck Schumer today and Trent, I can't remember his last name, out of Arizona, a Republican and a Democrat, both come out in favor of Kurdish independence. And the Republican from Arizona actually drafted legislation to that effect. So we may see it. We may actually be able to swing U.S. support towards an independent Kurdistan, whereas right now the State Department is adamantly dead set against it.
Well, isn't our Secretary of State a former chief of Chevron? Tillerson, was it Chevron that he ran? Or is that
he definitely has some ties that are not that aren't kosher. But yeah, so it could become a problem. But at the same time, I'm certain that Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, has advised in a war like this against the Kurds, the very first people that we would send in would be our special forces units. And all of our special forces units worked with the Kurds for the last 15 years. Their heart is not going to be in this fight. They're not going to want to defeat these guys. And I don't think that they'll try. So we have this very bizarre relationship because the people you would send in were protected in a lot of ways. The Green Berets, when they showed up, the Kurds protected them while they got their stuff together. So it's going to be really hard to send in, special forces units to fight these guys. There's a lot of loyalty there. In fact, I know a lot of SF guys that are there fighting for the Kurds right now on their own dime. So I don't see that as and Mattis is smart enough to know that. That's not a community that you don't want to give an order that won't be obeyed. And I don't know that they'll obey that order. So.
All right, so let's expand the perspective a little bit. This has been going on this has been a tense issue for a while. I mean, in 1991 with the Iraq uprisings, the Iraqi Kurds were essentially protected to an extent against Saddam Hussein by NATO no-fly zones. And then in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdistan basically became an autonomous region. Why has it taken so long for this to happen? If it's basically been a kind of autonomous region, what's taken this vote so long, and what's taken it so long for the international community to recognize it? I guess I'll field this one to Danny. Danny, do you have opinion on this?
I really don't know per se, but I would naturally assume that they've been fighting for so long that they haven't really had a chance to vote because they were putting forth like the actual, physical effort to carve out their own borders and to establish the region. So now that they have their borders carved out, now that they have protections and resources and all that kind of stuff, infrastructure, now they have to go about the legal, the declarations and all these kind of things to establish their own sovereignty. That's to the best of my understanding.
That's really accurate. Basically, the Kurds have been screwed since World War I. Every time something pops off there, they're like, "We'll give you your own country. Fight with us." This time, they went ahead and took their own country, and now it's a situation of them kind of daring anybody to take it back. And they learned from their mistakes. This whole time, they've been kind of playing NATO and playing the coalition forces and saying, hey, we need this. And a lot of the stuff that they were asking for, they didn't need to fight ISIS. They were smart enough to kind of play U.S. intelligence and play the U.S. military into giving them the stuff they would need to fight a war of independence if they needed it, like the surface-to-air missiles. ISIS doesn't have aircraft, but they sold it to the U.S. under the guise of, if Iran got involved, we would be able to help if we already had these. And DOD bought it and gave it to them. So now the Iraqis, the Kurds don't really have an air force, but even if the Iraqis tried to use them, they could knock them out. They played everybody, and they played it perfectly. But they've got 80 years of experience of getting screwed over. So,
all right. So, a few days ago, there was an article posted on the Washington Post, and the title is "Are Kurds more like Jews or Palestinians? ? It depends on whom you ask." And of course, it's the Washington Post, so it's essentially mouthpiece for the State Department. Let's pick this apart a little bit. Only one world leader, according to this article, has actually publicly backed the cause, and that's Netanyahu. So to pose that question to the two guests, and then DB, you can take a crack at it too. Which are Kurds more like, Jews or Palestinians?
Oh, without a doubt, Palestinians. The story's almost exactly the same. Post-Ottoman Empire, they formed all these countries. A substantial population of a distinct religious ethnic group was left in what's now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. And it was just large dysphoria. I guess the only difference is they won. They fought back and established their own territory. Plus, post, like we were talking about earlier, the Oded Yenin plan, Israel's long-term goal of balkanizing the Middle East into tiny ethnic sections, it benefited the greater cause. It benefited the Middle East. So they weren't, isolated? They were isolated, but they weren't surrounded per se. They didn't want their land. They were allowed by the Anglophile establishment and the international Zionists to compete for sovereignty within the larger region. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. According to this article, or at least the author of this article, says that the supporters, the Kurds and the Kurds and the Jews are both, they're ancient Middle Eastern peoples. They're both targeted for genocide by exterminationist neighbors. They are both embattled, once stateless minorities, moderate and secular outcasts in a sea of Arab extremism. Justin King, I pose the question to you now. What are the historical parallels here with the Kurds?
I would say that they're a lot like both. When you think about it, right off the bat, you're like, there's no similarities between the Jews and the Palestinians. There are, and it does have to do with all three groups have been targeted for extermination at one point or another. All have had their homelands taken away. All have. So I see a lot of parallels between the both. I would say that the militancy involved is probably closer to the way Palestinians are, but I would say the ideologies involved, as far as the Kurds, are very, by Middle Eastern standards, they're flaming liberals. If you were to compare them to any other group in the Mideast, you're like, wow, these guys, they're extremely progressive. So there, it's obviously going to lend more towards the Israelis. So I don't think that. I think that both sides. I think it's funny because I think both the left and the right eventually are going to want to claim the Kurds as their own. It was hard as hell mobilizing any of them to do anything in the last 2 years, but once they win, everybody's going to say, "Oh, they're with us." The Kurds, ideologically, most Kurds are left wing, whether it be communists, anarchists. There are some that want a representative government, but even in that representative government, it is the government is there to protect the idea of a Kurdish state, not to run the lives of Kurds. Which I see the right later on saying, see, they're small government Republicans, but we'll see how that plays out.
Can I interject with a point real fast?
Sure.
That makes me think of the broader scale of international independence, in the sense that, to my understanding, looking at the world now, most independence or sovereign movements originate from the left, because right conservative movements are more national. So you won't see a nationalist independence movement because they're already dedicated, to their state. I was thinking California, Catalonia. What's the one in Canada? How the whole left side of Canada, was it Oceania or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
That's very left. Crimea, I believe, was really left as far as Ukraine was concerned. Definitely, yeah. Kurdistan is like you said, left politically, much more left, much more what was the word, sectarian.
Mm-hmm.
When I was talking about the way they relate to the Palestinians, I was talking about being from the area, being natives. They're not having a a call to a homeland. They were already there protecting their homeland.
So there was actually a Kurdish-Palestinian alignment in the 80s. They fought together, the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Kurdistan Workers' Party actually trained and fought together in Lebanon. That's interesting.
The Kurdish Workers' Party is the PKK. Those are primarily those are Turkish Kurds. They're Kurds inside of Turkey. They're straight communists. They really are. And during the 80s, they could get a lot of funding via the Soviet Union, and they teamed up with a lot of groups outside of their area for training, and that's why there's such a disparity between the way the PKK, the Kurds in Turkey, and the YPG and all of the other groups we hear about, the way they fight. Because the PKK was trained primarily via the Soviet Union, and the rest of them were trained via the U.S. So they use very different tactics, and a lot of times that on the ground that causes issues. So they don't work together very often. But, as far as Danny wants to touch on the international aspects of all of this, and I do think it's interesting that we're seeing all of these local, very small government independence movements popping up. Catalonia being a perfect example. And I like it. My ideological bent is definitely, I am all about shattering every large country. So, I mean, I'm curious because earlier we chatted on Facebook and he said something about he's got this overriding point. I'm dying to hear what it is now.
I wanted to know what this meant in the long run, as far as if the Kurds are granted their independence and sovereignty, and other places like Spain cracks down on Catalonia, which it looks like is going to happen. It doesn't look like, even if they vote, that they will be even given a chance to give their independence. And another thing was the hypocrisy. And you said not really to touch on it. Honestly, I'm not really versed enough to touch on it a lot, but it's, if America and Israel do support a Kurdish independence, right? The Kurdish voting to be independent from Iraq, but they didn't support the Crimea independence from their country. And they said that Russia's intervention was, what did they call it, like an invasion and all this kind of stuff. So if Iraq doesn't want to step up, or if Iraq does choose to fight, and not give the Kurds the land, in America or Israel or one of their partners has to step up and help protect them, aren't we essentially doing the same thing for the Kurds that Russia did for the Crimeans? You get what I'm saying there?
Yeah. At the current time, the U.S. is actually opposing the Kurds getting away in every way that they can. Now, we've gotten some breakaway representatives, but right now the government stance is Kurdistan should not leave Iraq, the U.S. government. Now, the Israelis, on the other hand, they're on the other side. And if it does go loud, I would almost guarantee that you would have guys from the Institute or from the Mossad heading into Kurdistan to provide training, weapons, money, whatever they needed. But as far as the U.S. government, the one thing you can always count on them to do is be hypocritical when it comes to
right.
when it comes to foreign policies. I mean, that's the only consistency there is. So
I think it's interesting to see division between the policies of Israel and the United States the U.S. State Department, where most of the time I think they're aligned geopolitically. It's interesting to find a rare situation where the State Department, the Department of Defense, and Mossad, and Israel's government don't agree on the pathway, that they want to take geopolitically in the region.
I think one historical parallel is like Armenia, really, and they have their own kind of minority Kurdish population. But you look at Armenia, which had to fight and claw its way into its own country and suffered a genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Empire, and it's the same thing, man. Kurdistan just hasn't had that ability to gather itself. The Kurds haven't had that chance, and now they have the training, they have the arms. There's this window of opportunity, and you have to take it. You have to get security for your people.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be a lot of long-term fallout and benefit for independence groups worldwide because of this. And if Catalonia, right now the Spanish government's, they're like, we're not even going to let you vote, like they're threatening to shut down the vote. We're not going to honor it. We're just not going to let you do it. Which in a democracy, I find that hilarious. But if they are able to pull it off, if they can get it, you will immediately see the Basque, which is on the border between Spain and France. You're going to see them come back with a vengeance because they're going to want their own country too.
Right.
And all of these small dormant ethnicities scattered all over Europe and the Middle East, they were alive and well during the Cold War because both sides, used them for their own advantage. And then they kind of went dormant. And then all of them went dormant after, the September 11th attacks, because nobody wanted to be labeled a terrorist after that happened. Now that that's kind of a little bit behind us, I think that you're going to start seeing a lot of these groups come back. And if, depending on what happens in Catalonia, especially if it does evolve into some kind of militant conflict there, I definitely see the Basque coming back, because they'll see that as an advantage to have the Spanish occupied.
I think the Basque, I was reading about it earlier in preparation for this discussion. I think one of the main problems there is taxes. The Basque are already considered a religious minority, so they don't pay taxes, whereas Catalonia pays a majority of Spain's taxes. It's the richest or second richest city population in the country, so they're paying a large portion of the taxes, and that's a big driving factor of this is economics of that particular battle. And I think it can, if any of us are riot reporters, there's definitely a strong potential for some, Arab Spring style uprisings in Catalonia if they try to crack down on them too hard, because they're already sending in police and national police and all these kind of things, like you said, to prevent the vote. So in that kind of situation, in a powder keg, it doesn't take much to spark a full-blown rebellion, in which case that could be the catalyst to a much larger conflict. And even if they, if it's a peaceful, if they were to give them their sovereignty, just let them vote and say, okay, you can have your own little sovereign state, country, whatever they want to give them, that too could set off a domino effect that could lead all the way to California and Texas seceding from the Union,
Wow, that's a hell of a theory. I'd love to see that.
That's going to also lead to Minnesota joining Canada. Watch.
Well, there was a movement in Canada in Washington State. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they wanted to form their own little country there.
Now there's a push to join Canada, so that'll be fun.
So, these independence movements, and particularly the Kurdish one, I mean, this is the establishment of a new state, sort of. How does that fit into some of our larger opinions about state corruption? Like, what are the chances that Kurdistan is not going to be infiltrated and controlled by some of these larger powers in the area? Do we think that they'll be able to hold their autonomy, or will they just become a puppet state for some of the various conglomerates and nation states in the area?
You want me to go first? Don't matter. I think that it has to do with the banks. I think they already have semi-autonomy. They already have their own government. I can't remember what it's called, but I know they have a government, at least in the Iraqi Kurdistan part. What would happen is they would get financing for a government. So they would get a central bank. That's really, I think, the hallmark of independence in the 21st century, is having your own central bank to draw from for infrastructure and military, or whatever you need a bank for. In which case they would be indebted to the New World Order, which ultimately is why I think Israel doesn't, why they vote, why they're willing to stand behind the independence, because that is ultimately just another, how do you say, chessboard, another piece of their puzzle.
Okay, so this comes down to, or for you, this is a part of the larger issue of central banks controlling nations.
Try to visualize it like a video game, like a game of Risk, where when you go from country to country, it lights up in whatever color your character is, and your goal is to control all the countries. If it's a game like that, if it's a worldwide game, and you've seen the octopus, it's commonly depicted as the octopus, the tentacles of the Zionist banking establishment. If you can put a central bank into a country and allow it to establish its own autonomy while drawing money from you, and by most accounts you own the country because they're drastically indebted to you. So that's part of the puzzle to me, yeah.
All right, so I mean it's pretty well established how central banks have controlled third world countries, but in this particular instance, Justin, what are your thoughts on this coming down to a Zionist-controlled central bank? Does that factor into the equation for you?
No, not really. When it comes to, I mean, from the perspective I'm looking at it, when it comes to central banks are bad. They're at the same time, I don't see the octopus. I don't ever see. I'm one of those people. I like to see it, touch it, feel it. Unless you can show it to me, I don't really believe in it. So what a lot of people, when they see this giant conspiracy, I see a bunch of rich people making money. That's what I see. Is I don't see some giant conspiracy in which the new world order is going to take over everything. I see a bunch of rich assholes making deals with each other to get richer. That's always what I see. As far as them becoming a puppet, yeah, I mean, if somebody does get a large financial hold over them, I can see it. At the same time, these guys have fought for literally, hundreds of years to get their own country back. I don't see them farming out their sovereignty to anybody. I think they're going to be I think they're going to be a lot like Ireland. Ireland fought for a real long time. I mean, they didn't even take sides during World War II. They're one of the few neutral countries. So I don't see the Kurds becoming the doughboy of anybody in the Middle East.
Okay, then Danny, so in your opinion, Danny, what makes this more than just rich people making deals? What are the contours of this octopus that you think is clear to you? Why is this not clear to Justin? What would you like to add to that takes this beyond just corporatocracy, global corporatocracy?
I think it boils down to conceptualization. Whereas most people conceptualize a conspiracy as like a room full of people talking, like a dark room of the UN or something like that, or some shadow cabal in a Illuminati cellar. But what I'm talking about is the major financial lending institutions of the world, the banking institutions that lend money to governments. And there's only like 5 or 6 that I know of. The International Bank of Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, BRICS, independent. Iran has an independent bank, I believe. China has a bank. So there's only a handful of major lending institutions. And if you go around the world, country to country, Canada, America, Mexico, Russia, China, and you look at their debt to GDP, right? Most of these countries are real far in the negative. America's $20 trillion in debt. Russia's 17 trillion rubles in debt or something like that. China's 20-something trillion in debt. Like, every country is in debt. And when you trace who are these people in debt to, that becomes the true oligarchy of the world. That's the Illuminati, as it were, the shadow cabal, because when you look at Time magazine, you look at Fortune magazine's richest people in the world, they're giving you Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. They're not telling you that 100 people collectively together own a bank that several of the world's largest countries are $100 trillion in debt to. That's the octopus in the room, or the elephant in the room, rather. And I don't know how much Kurdistan can get off oil. And if they can fund, I mean, I think they have, in the greater Kurdistan, I think they said 35 million people, but in Iraqi Kurdistan and the base, I don't know, it'd be 15, 20 million people. So if they can create a big enough economy for themselves without having to go into massive debt with one of those institutions, that's a lot more secure future than if they say, take a certain amount of money from the IMF or from Zionist banks, because as we know, that's a contract, and contract means that the leasee expects something in return. And a lot of times in those contracts, they're a downward spiral, meaning that the GDP to interest, you can never pay it off. It just grows and grows and grows. And that, again, falls into one of those visual analogies that people like to use in cartoons on YouTube. So that's ultimately what I'm talking about, not like superhero villain stuff or underground lizards. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And, we talk about, I wrote an article a while back about how it's not really the New World Order, it's the deep state. There's all these different words for it now, which is essentially revolving doors in government that connect corporations to governments, nexus of Wall Street with foreign surveillance courts. There's all kinds of collusion going on. And, DB, we talk about it all the time. I like thinking about it as an octopus. That's fun. It's like it's visuals. So DB, what to you does this octopus? I mean, I'm still struggling to understand where exactly the two guests disagree, in terms of the ultimate control here. It still sounds to me like international conglomerates of rich people making deals to get rich.
I don't know if you're a fan of, you think the West is actually the greater sphere of control, or you think the East is. And, we can get into an entirely different show of how I think the East is in control of the world right now, but they're doing it in a very covert way, and they're kind of letting the West take the fall. I mean, you're seeing the Vatican, and you're seeing the Queen of England, and you're seeing Washington, D.C. come to the forefront, and you're seeing a lot of things driven by the Saudi lobby and the Israeli lobby, and you're like, what in the hell, are we committing like cultural suicide or what? And I have to think, because Japan and China are just the bigger sphere now, and they've taken things back, and the Opium Wars were only like a 200-year stopgap. That was it.
Yeah, I have to agree there.
Yeah, see, when it comes to the West and the East, to me now, I mean, when you look at it, every Chinese company is invested in the U.S., every U.S. company is invested in China. I don't see it, again, I see a spider web with a whole bunch of spiders. I don't see an octopus with a whole bunch of tentacles and one guy in charge, or even one entity. I mean, I think it's more comforting to think of it that way, in the sense of, somebody's in control. I don't think anybody's in control. I think it's just a bunch of not nice people.
A lot of spheres of competing power. That's really what it is.
Yeah, no, yeah. I like that analogy a lot. I think it's a dominance hierarchy. At all times, it's a competitive dominance hierarchy of multiple deep state, international business and government apparatuses, right? And within this hierarchy, this pyramid structure, as it were, there's going to be a fluctuating or changing inner circle of global power. And at one point in time, the American industrial complex, the American manufacturing, at that point in time, was the most wealth-generating machine in the world, was the most powerful machine in the world. And I think those times, like DB said, are coming to an end. With China's new Silk Road, with Israeli growing international strength, with the balkanization of the Middle East and other weakening states in South America, weakening states, and America's weakening state, the international Western economy falling, oil, the dollar being used as a reserve for oil changing. It's hard not to say that America is declining rapidly. As sad as that is, but it's hard not to come to that realization.
There's just one question to ask: is that when robotics is perfected, and I think we can all of us agree that'll probably be within the next 20 years, what country in the world comes to mind? That's the country that's going to rule. So they're already on the rise. They've been dynamic in the shadows, and they're going to come out from those shadows. They're going to run it all.
Wait, what?
Unless
What country?
Dude, when you think of robotics, are we not thinking about Voltron? I mean, come on, man.
But DB, right? Let's think positive for 1 second. What if technology like robots, like artificial intelligence, like cryptocurrencies, what if they empower people to decentralize? So what if technology, instead of centralizing us into a big brother, into a one world government, what if it shatters the world into a million autonomous zones?
Only the people that have the actual ability to learn the technical skills necessary for that will be able to do that. So, Danny, to answer your question, 10% of the population right now is going to be peachy, and the other 90% is getting chipped.
See, I don't know, because when I look at this and I look at the people that are actually making these moves and that understand the technology, and most of them, they're kind of on our side when it comes to that. When you look at the hacker culture, that technological environment, most of them, they don't give a damn about a nation state. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing today, as far as these small bids for independence, I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that it's funny that a reduction in belief in nationalism could actually lead to, nationalist bids for independence, but I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's sort of the paradox that I was trying to articulate earlier, and it will be interesting with the rise of artificial intelligence, and there's
it's good in the short term too, because it'll be more freedom in the short term. But eventually it'll lead to competition unless we actually just will come out with technology that gets us post scarcity. I know it's there; they're just hoarding it.
Yeah, it's...
On another positive note, I was just thinking about this recently, is we tend to put a negative spin on artificial intelligence. What I mean by that is we tend to say that AI is going to realize that we're destroying the world and do what it has to do to rid the world of its virus, But what if by chance artificial intelligence ends up benevolent, meaning that it's smart enough to recognize the world's problems, look at human beings and their fucking inabilities or lack of cohesion, and take the proper steps necessary to fix it?
Danny, I'm closer to that belief than I am in doomsday scenarios. I am actually an optimist when it comes to artificial intelligence. I don't know that it will definitely bring about. I don't think there's any way to foresee how the spider web with lots of spiders on it, as Justin calls it, is going to manage an overlapping artificial spider web with artificial spiders. It's such a complex. The world is already so complex. These issues are already so complex. It's almost incomprehensible for you to imagine how this is going to meet the buzzsaw of artificial intelligence. It's a fascinating question. We are running low on time, and clearly we can't resolve the artificial intelligence part of it. But I would like to get back a little bit to, in the foreseeable future, do we, what are some predictions we have in the final minutes? What do we think is going to happen in this scenario? And if you guys even want to bring it into North Korea for a minute, we can. I mean, it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room right now, which is the North Korean crisis.
I'm not afraid of North Korea. I think that's just CNN trying to drive ratings. I'm not worried about that at all. I think if America stopped pretending to nuclear bomb them every year, Korea would stop popping off at the mouth. I think Kurdistan's going to be voted, but they're going to get their independence. It's going to be a slow process. They're going to get a little chunk. They're going to get most of northern Iraq and probably a little chunk of Syria. I don't think that the Iranian Kurds are going to want to join that part. I think they're going to continue to be a part of Iran, the same with the Jordanian ones. But I also, like I said earlier, I see the Kurdistan state, if that's what it's named, because they don't have a name for it yet. I do see that attracting lots of other religious and ethnic minorities, particularly the Yazidis and the Christians, the Gnostics, some of the Astrozoreans. A lot of those people are going to find a safe haven in the Kurdistan region. And the main reason why we didn't get a touch on it, and I want to let Justin take it from here, but ISIS is dead. I think that this is a sign moving forward that Daesh is over. The Kurdistan, Russia has pushed them back. They're no longer going to be a major dominant military force in their region, and I think that local, it's going to start to restabilize into smaller balkanized states. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're going to see, as far as predictions for the future, I think you're going to see a lot more localized groups making bids for independence. And we'll probably be covering a little bit of that on TFC shortly. Last minute, right now, get on the phone or send your congressman, senator an email. Tell them to back this, because the worst case scenario is for the U.S. to oppose Kurdish independence and us end up going in militarily. It would be a disaster. So,
absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Good discussion.
Great talk, guys. Thank you for
Thanks,
having
gentlemen.
Yeah. Good talk. And,
Peace.
guys,
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go